I can't remember the first time I saw a Chinatown gate, or gateway or archway. Even after researching the topic, I'm not sure which is the proper term. I do know that the first time I really took notice of one was when I lived in Montreal a few summers ago and would regularly walk to the Chinatown there. Upon my return to the US, I started to notice just how ubiquitous these structures are. Despite this, there still seem to be this unspoken mystery to them. How did they come to be? When? Why do they look similar enough to be recognizable, and yet no two are exactly the same? Where were the informational plaques? I imagine that many Americans, if they've stopped to think about it for even a second, have come up with similar questions. To find an answer, I looked first to my own experience. In many ways, I'm your typical white American, but I have spent a couple months in China where I taught English in a so-called village of 100,000 called Diankou and traveled between teaching sessions to larger cities in the region. And I did see some archways when I was there, but frankly, I hardly remember them until I went back and found pictorial evidence because they were so overshadowed by everything else I saw. And I think part of the reason this everything else was so surprising is that I had no reference point for it back home. I'd been conditioned to think of China in terms of the architectural style embodied in the archways. In other words, China didn't really look like Chinatown. And the oh-so-ubiquitous gates didn't seem to play the same central role in China as they do in the officially designated Chinese communities in the US. I decided it was time to backtrack. It turns out that the architectural style upon which the archways are based does indeed have a historical precedent. The paifeng, as the archways are called, are likely derived from the Indian Torana, or temple gates. They come in a wide variety of styles, from wood to stone or brick. An early version appeared during the Tang Dynasty, but it was not until the Qing that they started to take on a recognizable shape. They were used for practical purposes, as a way to subdivide cities into administrative units, and for things like accessorizing the entrances to shops to attract customers. They also had deep symbolic meaning, commemorating great deeds and honoring ancestors. They often sported inscriptions extolling moral principles or government achievements. Okay, so we've established that there is a historical precedent, and the idea for the Chinatown archway didn't just spring from the ground one day. But why is it that these structures have come to symbolize modern-day Chinatowns when the originating paifeng have long since ceased to uphold their previous functions and now serve primarily as decorative monuments? The 99% Invisible podcast episode entitled Pagodas and Dragon Gates, with its supplementary information drawn from other sources, begins to provide an answer. In the early 1800s, Chinese immigrants to San Francisco began to congregate in an area informally known as Chinatown. They had few other options due to racist housing policies, but the community also provided a sort of refuge from the discrimination they faced elsewhere. At this time, there was nothing visually distinct about the area. Its Victorian architecture was much like that of the rest of the city. By the turn of the century, however, Chinatown had developed a reputation as a pit of depravity. Drugs and prostitution were rampant, and white Americans would employ locals as guides to get a taste of this exotic land. Then, in 1906, a massive earthquake and its resulting fires leveled Chinatown. In its wake, there was a chance to rebuild anew and ameliorate Chinatown's tarnished reputation. To this end, a local businessman hired two architects, neither of whom had been to China, to design the new Chinatown. Unsurprisingly, the result was a pastiche of ancient China based upon centuries-old images of a time when paifeng dominated the landscape of Chinese cities. As planned, this collage appealed to tourists who loved the watered-down version, which played to their expectations of what Chinatown should be. The podcast goes on to say that the aesthetics of Chinatown employed in San Francisco, and particularly the Gateway, were replicated around the country and the world. This felt like the answer I'd been looking for in one easily digestible story. Finally, my search was complete. And yet, when I tried to find corroboration, I ran into conflicting accounts. One thing all the sources I consulted seemed to agree upon was that the desire to attract tourists played a major role in the construction of the archways. And this is reflected in stats. Japan's two Chinatowns with gates, Kobe and Yokohama, are vastly more popular with tourists than the Chinatowns without gates in the country, like Nagasaki. However, when it comes to the relationship between the members of the paifeng diaspora, the aforementioned consensus breaks down. Although it seems that the San Francisco Gate may well be the oldest, there is little mention of it in the origin stories of the other archways. Some cities, like DC and Philadelphia, claim to have come up with the idea for their respective gates completely independently of any San Franciscan influence. Interestingly, in both cases the city partnered with a Chinese city, which played a major role in its gate's inception. DC's sister city is Beijing, and the archway is supposedly the result of a collaboration meant to revitalize the community in the 80s when many Chinese were moving to the suburbs. Building a sense of community and uniting around a shared cultural identity are oft-cited reasons for the archways. Another way to think about the gate is as a boundary. Of course, this is literally a gate's ostensible purpose, but the conceptualization has greater implications when taken in the context of Chinatown. To place a boundary between Chinatown and the rest of the city is to clearly designate the area as separate and to preserve its special qualities, whatever those may be, from the threat of outside influence. This is the reasoning of those who are pushing for the erection of a gateway in New York as a way to combat encroachment upon the territory by the rest of the city. I have come to the realization that my single-minded focus on discovering the true story of the gates has obscured more significant questions. It seems that perhaps the mystery of the archway's origins is not meant to be solved, and what's more important is their role in the present. These fantastic creations exist at the convergence of fantasy and reality, authenticity and commercialization, history and modernity. Their dual nature makes them all the more alluring and all the more enigmatic.